one of the qualities that's shared by Temple lawyers is a passion for the communities they serve. And in that sense, our speaker today, despite earning his JD elsewhere, something for which we have forgiven him, is nevertheless a Temple lawyer through and through. The Honorable Theodore McKee has spent almost 4 decades serving his community, both professionally and personally. Since 2010, he has served as the Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, to which he was appointed by President Clinton in 1994. Before that, he served as a judge on the Court of Common Pleas here in Philadelphia, as an Assistant United States Attorney, as a Deputy Solicitor in the Law Department of the City of Philadelphia, and General Counsel to the Parking Authority. While serving on the Court of Common Pleas, Judge McKee chaired the Pennsylvania Sentencing Commission. His service achievements are really too lengthy to mention, and there is a lengthy bio in the program. I'm wondering if he actually possesses the wizardry power to bend time, because otherwise I don't know how he can both author so many wise and influential judicial opinions while lending not just membership, but service on a number of nonprofit and institutional boards. Judge McKee graces Temple in 2 ways, in many ways, but I should say, but 2 in particular. He's a member of the university's Board of Trustees and a member of the law school's Board of Visitors. In both of those roles, we have been the grateful beneficiaries of his wisdom and leadership on many occasions. Judge McKee's record of service is humbling and inspiring, both for its volume as well as the philosophy behind it. That as lawyers, we should be faithful servants, not just to the letter of the law, but to its spirit, a spirit of justice tempered with mercy, imbued deeply with the humanity of the people it was created to serve. This is the spirit in which Judge McKee has spent a lifetime serving our community, and for which I'm honored to consider him a mentor and a friend. Please welcome the Chief Judge of the Third Circuit of the United States Court of Appeals, the Honorable Ted McKee.
Actually, I feel like I should sit down because it's got to go downhill from that incredible introduction. Thank you so very much. Dean Epps, fellow university trustees, members of the faculty and administration, and of course, you, the graduating class of 2014, your parents and loved ones. Thank you for allowing me to share a few thoughts with you here today. But before we begin, I want to reiterate something that has already been touched upon, and that is I want to acknowledge the memory of Professor Edward Olbaum. He's responsible for developing Temple's trial advocacy program into one of the highest ranked, most respected trial advocacy programs in the country. And I'm not just saying that as puffery, that is actually true. Last year, I believe, our trial advocacy team to qualify for the finals in Puerto Rico beat Harvard, small school up in the Northeast you may have heard of. He was a giant in the legal and academic community, and he will be missed. I'm not only honored to address you today because of my daughter, Amelia, as a member of your graduating class, but also because I had the distinct privilege of coming to the law school and honoring you and addressing you 3 years ago, a little more than 3 years ago, during your orientation. No doubt some of you were busy surfing the web back then on your smartphones when I addressed you and have no recollection of ever having seen me before. David Lane, David, you still back here? I want to thank you for the shout out. Probably you could not get Wi-Fi that day, and you were forced to listen, but you did score some points by acknowledging that you were there. Unfortunately, all my clerkships are filled for the next 3 or 4 years, so there's no payback involved with that, but thank you. If it makes you feel any better, I am not going to use this opportunity to offer you any advice, so you can put your smartphones away. I am, however, going to use this opportunity to share some very real concerns that I hope you will take with you as you enter on your careers. However, before I do that, it's important for me to mention one disclaimer, and that is, it is important that you understand my remarks today are just that, they're my remarks, that of citizen Ted McKee, not of Judge Ted McKee. I have much more freedom when I can step out of the judicial role. My message to you today is simple. Use your knowledge of the legal system to become informed, caring members of your community. In the words of Horace Mann, Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity. Horace Mann uttered that command 150 years ago, and the message is no less important today than it was back then. 3 centuries ago, Edmund Burke explained how your caring engagement in the legal process and in your communities can win you a victory for humanity. He warned, and I'm quoting, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing." History's most pernicious atrocities bear this out. In a marvelous book entitled "They Thought They Were Free," former BBC columnist Milton Mayer shares the conclusions he drew after taking up residence in a small town in Germany outside of Berlin that he calls Kronenberg in his book. He went there shortly after World War II in an effort to try to understand how a modern, industrialized nation like Germany, with an institutionalized democracy and representative government, could have allowed the seeds of fascism to ripen into the horror of the Third Reich. Now, I fully appreciate that any attempt to compare pre-war Nazi Germany with the United States today has major limitations, and you should not interpret my comments as suggesting that the institutional infirmities that gave rise to the Third Reich could somehow allow a similar collapse today. That is not my point. Nevertheless, there are lessons to be learned from history, and at the very least, Mayer's study illustrates the importance of civic engagement. In the town he called Kronenberg, Mayer befriended several ordinary citizens from many different walks of life to try to find out why things went so terribly wrong in Germany in the years leading up to and during World War II. He found the fatal flaw was not necessarily anti-Semitism, intolerance, or lack of education. Each of those things played a role, but none of them was the main determinating factor. The enabling facilitator instead of the demise of democratic government in Germany was nothing more complicated than the complacency of the ordinary citizen. Mayer concluded that the citizens of Kronenberg had simply not been very concerned with what was going on around them, as long as they were not inconvenienced by it. Thus, what began with a series of relatively small encroachments on liberties of some grew into one of history's most unspeakable horrors. As one resident explained, and I'm quoting, "If the last and worst act had come immediately after the first and smallest act, thousands, yes, millions would have been sufficiently shocked. But of course, that isn't the way it happened. In between come all of the hundreds of little steps, some of them imperceptible, each of them preparing you to be shocked, not to be shocked by the next." In the words of another resident of Kronenberg, quote, "We had only to go on as we were and keep out of trouble. What could have been easier? Only others were in trouble." Mayer also concluded something about the perpetrators of the violence. He concluded that those who were actually involved in the brutality of the Third Reich were indistinguishable as a group from those who were not. His conclusion was corroborated many years later, when in 2008, the international edition of the German magazine Spiegel contained an article with the following headline: "Everyday Murder, Nazi Atrocities Committed by Ordinary People." The article summarized then recent studies about the people who carried out the atrocities in the name of the German state. In the words of the article, those people included committed Nazis, people who had nothing to do with the Nazi Party. The murderers and their assistants included Catholics and Protestants, the old and the young, people with double doctorate degrees, and poorly educated members of the working class. And the percentage of psychopaths was no higher than the average percentage in society as a whole. Now, I highly recommend that each of you take the time to read that article. The English translation is still available online, and you can find it by Googling Nazi atrocities and ordinary people. Now, I don't have time to go into the article in depth today, but I do want to mention one person who was chronicled in that article. He was a young lawyer named Walter Blume, B-L-U-M-E. His father had been a lawyer and a school teacher. Blume joined the Nazis after completing the equivalent of our bar exam and probably going through a ceremony not unlike we are going through here today. But despite his law degree, he eventually rose to the rank of colonel in the SS. Years later, he was one of those convicted of crimes against humanity at Nuremberg. The co-defendants in his trial included a dentist, a university professor, an opera singer, a Protestant pastor, a teacher, and a few journalists. I have no doubt that they were not unlike the ordinary citizens of Cronenberg that Mayer describes in his book. As I explained a few minutes ago, I do not suggest that this analogy is perfect or even that it has a literal application to the world that you will be entering. Moreover, Bloom and his co-defendants were far more than quiet onlookers. They were active participants in the carnage. You may ask then, if the analogy is so imprecise, why discuss it? I mention it because it illustrates the extent to which complacency can enable and become the enemy of democracy. I mention it because the force of Edmund Burke's warning should still be with us, and that is, the triumph of evil only requires that good people in society do nothing. Albert Einstein said much the same thing when he warned, quote, "The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on without doing anything," close quote. A few years ago, the University of Connecticut conducted its annual State of the First Amendment survey in an attempt to assess how Americans view the Bill of Rights. The findings are less than reassuring. 34% of Americans then polled said the First Amendment goes too far. 46% said there is too much freedom of the press. 28% felt that newspapers should not be able to publish articles without prior government approval. Now, those numbers may be somewhat skewed because the poll was taken closer in time to the carnage of 9/11. A more recent poll has percentages that are much more consistent with our fundamental freedoms, although the more recent polling numbers, I submit, are still very disturbing and surprising. But query, if the fundamental liberties that are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights are contingent upon current events and external circumstances, how fundamental are they? How durable are they? And how can courts ensure their longevity? The answer to the last question is easy. Courts simply cannot preserve liberties when so many people, so many governed, either disagree with the underlying principles of democracy or simply do not understand or care about them. Far too many of our fellow citizens simply do not care enough to get involved at the most basic and least inconvenient level of self-government. One would be hard-pressed to find a midterm election where more than 1 in 3 persons of voting age bothered to vote. In fact, the numbers going back to 1980s is the atypical year when more than 50% of those eligible to vote even in a presidential election. The midterm election, I said, is usually less than 1 in 3, even though the control of Congress hangs in the balance. 2 out of 3 persons who otherwise could vote simply don't bother to. Our democratic institutions cannot survive forever in the face of that kind of complacency. Indeed, there is much evidence that the lofty goals that are embodied in the Constitution are no longer even aspirational in today's 24-hour news cycle. By way of example, I refer you to the 2008 presidential primary season. A presidential candidate back then who held a strong lead in the polls for a substantial period of time stated on national television that if he were president, he would send U.S. Marshals or police to arrest judges who issue, quote, controversial decisions. We can assume that a controversial decision would be one which he disagreed with. He boasted that he would force those judges to appear before Congress and explain their decisions. He also proclaimed that if elected, he would order his national security personnel to disobey any order of the Supreme Court that he deemed inconsistent with the nation's security. Now, it is tempting to dismiss those statements as mere pandering or political puffery, and it may well be that's all they are. However, the point is, where was the public outcry, where was the indignation, and where were the other leaders of that candidate's own party who could have and clearly should have denounced such statements as being totally irresponsible and the antithesis of a democratic government? Do not focus on whether the candidate was serious, although that is not an insignificant consideration. Focus on the fact that he apparently had absolutely no fear of popular outrage at suggesting that he would initiate such a regime. And remember that the political climate is such that he could safely conclude that the political benefits of such statements outweighed any risk. Judges and courts cannot forever preserve fundamental freedoms in the face of such an environment. The interviews of the residents of Cronenberg should serve to remind us all of the importance of critical, informed, and caring involvement in our communities. I stress critical and informed involvement because information is so important to a representative democracy, and it is so very easy to get and so readily available in today's technological society. Now, I do not want to totally dampen this wonderful event, but I do want you to remember the remarks of the citizens of Cronenberg and the fact that a law degree made no difference whatsoever to Walter Bloom. As you leave here today, think about that and remember that the true significance of your law degree is not the technical knowledge you have obtained, but what you choose to do with it. Use your intellect, your influence, and your legal training to make a difference. Each of you can win a victory for humanity. Each of you can make a difference merely by caring enough to think critically, be informed, speak out, and get involved. If you remember nothing else that I have said today, I hope you'll remember at least that. I want to thank you for your attention. Good luck with your careers, and please remember to express your love and gratitude to all those who have made this day a reality for you. Thank you.